Welcome everyone to What the Force, and welcome to a special meta music episode where unfortunately Christy could not make it, but in her place we have a special guest who we invited on the show because we literally talk about him every single episode and the great work that he does.
Wow.
I'd like to introduce Frank Lehman, who's the assistant professor at Tufts University. Hello.
Hello. Thank you so much for having me.
And I have this quote. So Frank
Oh, gosh.
works fast. Within a day of the opening of Star Wars The Last Jedi, he had updated his complete catalog motivic material in Star Wars episodes 1 to 8. So within a day, you had updated all of the leitmotifs that are in your catalog.
Well, I got to work quick or else someone will also get in there and steal the thunder of naming these leitmotifs. My favorite part.
Is that really your favorite part, to name them?
It is a challenge, right? John Williams very rarely comes out and just says, this is Rey's theme. There may be one or two occasions where it's unambiguous, but a lot of the stuff in like The Last Jedi, I had to come up with something that seemed suitable as a label.
Yeah, some of the themes do kind of end up coming from the names on the soundtrack, and some of them were, I guess, working titles that ended up either being put into the metadata or whatever, like Qui-Gon's Noble End, like,
oh god, worst spoiler of all time.
Yeah, and like on Dagobah, the magic tree, like we get some good ones from John Williams' brain, how it works.
Yeah, but like with The Last Jedi, and there's all this new thematic material on Octo. I hope I'm saying that right. Octo? Do they ever say it in the movie?
Octo, yeah.
Octo. It's not identified as anything specific, so I kind of just came up with the idea of Luke in exile as the target for these themes, and that name seems to have stuck. I've seen other people refer to those little melodies as Luke in exile. So
yeah, and like
that's the advantage of getting in quick.
Yeah, you get to name things. It's like a scientist like trying to figure out, like, hey, what should I name this theorem? Well, I'm the first that came up with it.
It's my way basically of sort of basking in John Williams' glow a little bit and having a tiny impact on ultimately what is, of course, his genius, but being able to label things is part of the fun, for sure.
So Christy and I have talked about leitmotifs and especially referred to the catalog multiple times and linked to it. But I wanted to give you a chance to kind of explain what you do, because like what is Frank's role in the real world? I would say, Professor Lehman?
Oh well. Yeah. My role in the real world. Well, on weekdays I'm teaching courses in music theory at Tufts, courses in music analysis. Sometimes I get lucky and I get to teach a little film music too. In fact, my students have a film scoring assignment coming up. I myself am not a composer. I kind of dabbled with it a little bit in college, as a lot of people who go into music studies do. And I found it fascinating. I mean, I've always been completely captivated by the art of film scoring. And I did try my hand at it a little bit, not to great success. I don't think it was in my cards to become a film composer. But even just sort of brushing up against the craft gave me some insights in how it works. Instead of teaching, my sort of research activities really do focus on film music and the study of film music, in particular, these big orchestral symphonic scores, which John Williams is especially well known for, and which are typically extremely rich in themes. So I always delight to find new themes, new leitmotifs, things to guide you through a score. And this has been a recurrent fascination of mine for a very long time, but I've been able to leverage it into a career. Bizarre, but it's true.
So why Star Wars? I know that part of your normal job is, but this is like a hobby that you focus on.
Yeah. I probably would be doing this even if I didn't have academic credentials to do it. It's just so pleasurable for me, and it seems to generate a lot of value for other people, particularly online. But Star Wars is just a particularly rich symphonic and thematic tapestry, right? Unprecedented, in fact, at least in film music. I don't know of any other series that have quite as dense and continuous musical evolution as Star Wars. Maybe Lord of the Rings, if you include the Hobbit trilogy there. Howard Shore has another very large sort of lexicon of musical themes. But John Williams has them beat in terms of sheer number of films, right? So Lord of the Rings is 6, Star Wars is 8, and counting, at least for the saga films. And of course, we get all the anthology films and TV shows and video games. Everything just explodes, right?
Yeah.
So there's a lot of material, and if you like sort of wading into that stuff and categorizing things and discovering new things, it's a really appealing process just to sort of dig into this massive musical universe. And it helps if you like Star Wars too. I mean, I'm not going to lie, I enjoy the series quite a lot. I have since I was a kid. And it's sometimes hard for me to sort of disentangle, what came first, my love of music and John Williams, or my interest in this film franchise. I think ultimately I'm going to come down on the music. Like a bad Star Wars film wouldn't bother me as much as a bad Star Wars score. Thankfully, I don't know that we've had either of those things so far. But even if the movies were really uninteresting to me, I still would be, I think, totally thrilled and excited to listen to new music in this unfolding musical tapestry.
Every aspect of Star Wars is storytelling, especially the music itself, which is a character, a layer, the emotions of the characters. Like it's so much. Yeah.
In some ways, it sort of serves as the film's unconscious, right? Telling you things that the characters aren't literally saying, or things that are on their mind. I think particularly in the sequel trilogy, there's a lot of this sort of internal narrative that's being driven about the principal characters, things that aren't stated, maybe kind of encoded within the music. And there's also the aspect of these scores to sort of elevate the film, or to give it a more mythical quality. I think a lot of that has to do with just, the use of the orchestra and these tried and tested musical techniques for generating this feeling of mythical storytelling. But it's a lot more than just sort of having an identifier for this character or this object.
Yeah.
The scores do that, but it's considerably more sophisticated, and it just gets more and more sophisticated as Williams keeps on adding layers to sort of multi-level text. So, yeah.
I call the storytelling iterative in some ways, because it's...
Oh, that's a great phrase, yeah.
Because, you take it and you transform it over time, and you're almost always kind of working on it. But it seems like Williams has done that with the musical layers that he's built into it, and the, like you said, mythology that he's building with the music, because mythology fundamentally is iterative as other people, and we're about to see that more and more people take on the musical myth in a way.
Yeah, and it has been so wonderful for me personally to hear Michael Giacchino and John Powell's contributions to this series. I think it's especially interesting with Solo and John Powell, where Williams generated this sort of standalone concert piece, The Adventures of Han, to provide thematic sort of a wellspring that then Powell developed in this fascinating way with his own wonderful themes, and it's such a rich and complex score.
Yeah,
but it does show.
I love Solo so much.
It's so wonderful. I can't get over it. This is going to sound like heresy, but I may have listened to it more than the Last Jedi score. It says nothing about the quality about Last Jedi. It just says a lot about the quality of Solo. I think it's phenomenal.
I think what Powell ended up doing was interesting. Adding in so many different layers of stylistic choices that we hadn't heard before, that kind of opened up Star Wars, I think, in a new direction from a musical standpoint.
Yeah, and I think that's what's going to have to happen. I mean, Star Wars is going to go on after Williams retires, whether that's soon or like in another 86 years. I don't think that he'll ever willingly stop writing music, but the franchise will continue, and I, for one, really look forward to new musical voices. I've heard that, I hope I don't mispronounce his name, but Ludwig Göransson is slated to score the Mandalorian series, and just based on even just his score for Black Panther, now Academy Award-winning score.
Yes,
I think he'll bring his own very unique musical perspective and his palette on board, and just the more voices the better, the more styles the better. Star Wars music doesn't have to be just one thing, even if we do kind of have the core, which is the Williams 19th century symphonic, bombastic, lyricism. I think it can
heavy
be
on
so
the
much
French horns.
very heavy on the French horns. Yeah, I know French horns do appreciate his writing for them. It can be probably pretty exhausting, but that's not all the time that you get such interesting brass writing, and that's definitely part of the core Williams and core Star Wars musical
Yeah.
DNA.
So, what is your favorite, I guess, Star Wars musical idea?
Oh, geez.
So it could be a leitmotif or a theme, or something that's just a touch.
Well, like in a very general and sort of abstract sense, I think the whole leitmotif process or thematic identification, that is in a way a sort of organizing idea for the entire franchise, and it didn't have to be that way. Back when Lucas was first producing episode for A New Hope, or Star Wars, really, 1977, whatever it was called then, the true original. Initially, the story goes that he wasn't interested in having originally composed music. He was more curious about sort of doing the Stanley Kubrick thing, like 2001, where there's a compilation of pre-existing classical music, I think, in Star Wars. And the rumor has it that his good friend Steven Spielberg said, "Well, I just worked on a couple of projects with this really talented composer John Williams, and maybe you should let him convince you that actually this picture does deserve and need original music. Do so much more for the myth and the emotionality and the audience engagement if there was newly composed music." And so Williams came on, and I think he proved his point pretty well. And part of the advantage of writing newly composed music is you can have these consistent themes which are introduced and are developed and evolve and transform over the course of initially just one film, but these things proliferated in ways that no one anticipated with the first film. It grants a kind of organic unity, to use a somewhat fraught phrase, to the first film and to all the subsequent entries in the franchise, because you have these originally composed melodies that carry through and follow the characters and follow the themes and follow the sort of underlying narrative, and are able to adapt, importantly, to new situations and new styles. And this was kind of adoption of a technique which was very well established. I mean, it's not as if John Williams invented the idea of having character themes or leitmotifs. Yeah. I mean, it was common practice in classical Hollywood. It was developed primarily by the German opera composer Richard Wagner in the middle and late 19th century. But Williams, I mean, certainly he can be credited for reviving this. So, yeah, I guess that's a very long-winded answer, but my favorite Star Wars musical idea is the implementation of the leitmotif principle. And then specifically, I mean, it's hard not to feel a personal attachment to the Force theme. Like so, Binary Sunset, that's what hooked me on
Obi-Wan Kenobi's theme. All of
that hooked me as a kid. Yeah, just as a kid. I remember watching the movie on VHS because I was too young to see it and to have seen it in the original run. Watched the movie down with the den with my dad and younger brother, and I saw the scene of Luke Skywalker looking over to the twin sunset and hearing this, just incredibly evocative and compelling music, and being unable to get it out of my head. And I must have been 8-9 years old at the time, and I had heard John Williams music before. I was into it, but I hadn't heard it, and I hadn't heard music do that kind of work in the context of a larger narrative before. And it's so powerful. And amazingly, it could have been otherwise too. Like, it could have been otherwise if George Lucas had used, some pre-existing music by Strauss or Wagner there. But even then, like, there's an alternate version of the cue, which you can hear online that didn't end up getting used. Like, Williams' first, it shocks me, his first instinct for that iconic scene was not to use the Force theme, but to have this very dark, kind of ominous, non-thematic underscore.
Yeah, I would say that, like, in that moment, that was actually both the, editor and George and, like, music editor saying, this actually deserves this other theme that you've written for Ben.
Yeah.
Yay, let's use this here. It's not, and that's where, like, some of the iteration happens, where even in the first movie we got changes already because of George's vision, and we get a lot of that actually in the prequels. There's musical edits all over the place.
Oh, all over the place. Yeah. it can be a kind of nightmare
Yeah.
figuring out what the original intent was. It's a good sort of object lesson in how music is composed and how it's treated in cinema. It's often very practical, and there's a lot of, passes before the final product is arrived at, and that may involve music that's rearranged or reshuffled or rewritten. I mean, the Binary Sunset is a particularly, I think, striking example of that. But
I mean, we get it in Solo too with the Chicken in the Pot song. The voice of the frog, like Alien, is in a completely different range. It messes me up every time I listen to the soundtrack now.
Right. So is it so? On one, it's really.
It's low. It's like
strikingly low
and like bass almost. And and then I think it's on the soundtrack. It's the high squeaky frog sound.
So who knows like what the rationale was for that? But I'm glad that I get to hear those two versions in two different contexts.
Yeah, and to me, I would say The Last Jedi is probably going to be the closest to a pure Williams score as it is intended.
Yeah.
Because I think that Ryan was almost afraid to touch it. This is a genius. I'm Rian Johnson. I will give you a music-only version. Can we get a music-only version of all of the films? Like, that would be amazing.
Yeah. Oh, what a treat. And not something that people who follow film music or study film music are used to, having this version of the film that is just pure music. I mean, it gives it a completely different character, more like a ballet or
classic silent film in some ways.
Yeah, silent. Yeah, well, that's exactly right. And I think to some extent that's how Williams conceives of these. I mean, certainly there's plenty of scenes that have a lot of dialogue, and the music has to be a little subservient in those cases. But more than a lot of other film genres, I mean, the Star Wars and fantasy and science fiction films do offer the opportunity for music to come to the fore and to sort of sing in a way that they may not in a more talky drama. So he has a certain advantage in being able to write long breathed melodies and cues that sort of stand on their own, that really do arrest the attention of the listener in a way that you might not normally take for granted in a film score.
I've taken away so much already, but
yeah,
I did want to just kind of briefly set the stage and talk about leitmotifs and what that is, because
of course,
we use this language, and I am I'm going to say that I'm a musical layman. you're
I am also a musical layman.
You're a musical layman, but I'm the person that does not have musical training at all. And how I listen to music is I'm really good with patterns, and so that's why I tend to pick up on the leitmotifs and the themes being used again. And I listen for what emotions the music provokes in me, and I feel like that's a perfectly good way to appreciate John Williams and Star Wars music. But for those that
that's kind of the right way.
Well, maybe.
Yeah, what I'm doing is a little perverse, right? I'm not sure that he would be all that amused that someone was poring over his music with a fine-tooth comb, discovering every little probably unintentional musical resemblance or symbolism. But
And yeah, sometimes a cigar is just a cigar in a very Freudian kind of way. Like sometimes they use Leia's theme for the death of Obi-Wan Kenobi because that happens to just be the best music that they had at the time to use. You know.
And it has, to its credit, the music there is, very sweeping and romantic and emotional and extroverted, and that's kind of what the scene called for.
Yeah.
And there's one misconception about the leitmotif technique that it's easy to have is that they have to remain fixed in their meanings rather than somewhat flexible and sort of symbolically floating. And most of the time it is sort of one-to-one relationship. Leia's theme will be associated with Leia, or the Imperial March will be associated with Darth Vader and the Empire. But there are plenty of instances, and this is just sort of one of the capacities of leitmotifs to exceed their original definitions. It makes categorizing them and cataloging them somewhat difficult, because you do get cases where, is this theme acting to represent the Force, or is it acting to sort of establish the character of Obi-Wan Kenobi, especially in the prequels, and especially in Episode 3, it almost sort of reverts back to an Obi-Wan Kenobi motif, which is fascinating. There are lots of people who assume it's Luke Skywalker's theme, at least initially,
Yep.
because of the strength of that binary sunset
his
cue.
is the main theme. Technically,
yeah. But the main theme that spreads out and that can attach to everyone. I mean, it attaches to like Han Solo and like I think General Grievous gets it at one point.
Han Solo gets like the battle main theme, the battle, like da 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 da, that theme. Just for me, the non-musical person, a leitmotif is the application of similar, I guess, thematic musical choices to a character or situation. Is that correct? Or maybe describe it. Yeah.
Well, no, I think that's absolutely right. I mean, they're kind of musical symbols, right? They attach, probably most famously in this franchise, they attach to characters, but they can also sort of represent more physical things, swords and ships and locations. They can also very easily latch onto symbolic content or abstract ideas, like
concepts. Like we get a little bit of a theme with the beacon in The Last Jedi between Rey and Leia, and like that almost connection between the two of them.
Yes, in that case, very subtle, still quite effective, right? It doesn't have to be actively noticed to still have some sort of impact on the film. So yeah, it's a flexible kind of process, and it can help composers generate musical material. If there's a deadline, you sort of come up with your themes and then just place them in the appropriate places.
So is it like a shortcut in some ways? Like,
I think so some of the critics of the procedure would consider it like a shortcut or something that's a little bit too easy or too straightforward. I don't think that's actually the case, generally speaking. I mean, I can kind of see where a critic of the technique might say, "Oh, this is too literal-minded," or "You're not really inventing new material. You're kind of just sending your pre-existing themes through the sort of score mill." Like a case like Star Wars or Lord of the Rings, to give another example. I mean, that really shows that actually it is a deeply musical process and a very transformative one as well.
Yeah. I would say it's almost like using like a name in somebody's in music. Like the theme or the leitmotif is like giving a character or a situation an actual identifiable musical name in the language.
Yeah. And actually, I mean, maybe it wouldn't surprise you, but there's been all kinds of research in all different directions on the history and the theory of leitmotif. And some people have studied the connection with linguistics and the name-like quality of leitmotifs. I'm thinking a chapter by a music theorist named Justin London that dealt explicitly with that issue.
Yeah.
But the thing is, like, names don't normally change, right? I guess,
Well, they get different connotations when you're using a name is being used by a loved one, and maybe it's shortened or it's given with a different phrasing. Like, my name is Marie-Claire, but many people call me MC, right? It's still the same name, but it's done in a different context.
Well, that's a really good point. And you can kind of do the same thing with leitmotif. You could expand it, to suit one context, or cut it short and just have sort of like the initials or the sort of pet name version of a character theme.
The pet name,
And then, like, in a lot of cases, I mean, it does almost become like a shorthand, so you don't need to announce the full 8 or 16 measures of a character's leitmotif. Sometimes just the first 2 notes, or even just a sort of characteristic sound, can be enough to sort of cue you in.
Like how Kylo's theme feels like Dark Side and feels like the Imperial March, but is not quite that. And so they feel similar. And is that what you say about thematic ideas kind of carrying throughout the saga?
Yeah. There's this wonderful way in which, because you have this consistency of one author primarily, John Williams, and he has, his style has changed in some profound ways over the course of 40 years now. But there is also certainly a consistency to the way that he imagines like musical identification. So the dark side does definitely have a sound that's over and above any one character. Like you get it with the Imperial motif in the original Star Wars. You get an Empire Strikes Back with the Imperial March / Darth Vader's theme. And Kylo Ren, his music also participates in this kind of associative web. So you have the orchestration, the big brass chords. You have the repetition of a single note in his more hesitant theme, which to me is kind of like a sort of sideways reference to the Imperial March, which also is based on a repeated note. But Kylo's hesitant theme, it never really gets anywhere. It can't go beyond itself.
It's stuck.
And harmonically, it's stuck. It says that it needs to let the past die, but it is very sort of fastened to one specific idea, the sort of legacy of Darth Vader. So even in his brief little theme, you get that.
It's ruminating almost.
But the wonderful thing, among the many wonderful things about Kylo Ren's material, is the way that it can kind of sometimes sort of snake into other cues or into other character themes. So there's a moment in Last Jedi when Luke Skywalker is silently sort of walking through the Millennium Falcon, and he comes into the cockpit and he sees the Han Solo's dice.
Yeah.
And it had been a sort of a relatively straightforward statement of the Force theme up until that point, but over on top of it, there's just this tiny little string fragment, which doesn't even, it barely lasts 3 notes, but it is unmistakably part of the sort of Kylo Ren motivic cluster, so to speak. It starts with this descending semitone, and it's very ominous sounding, but it's just like a brief thought that comes in and then leaves just as quickly in the musical texture. And I think it's a wonderful moment. It clearly, like, it's there to remind us, this is why Han's not present anymore, because Kylo did him in, But and that tells you what's sort of going on in Luke Skywalker's mind as well. I mean, there's no literal mention of Kylo Ren here or Ben Solo.
So what's, like you said, the unconscious of Luke is coming through in the music.
Yeah. So you get, in addition to this wonderful layered performance by Mark Hamill, the music is also adding complexity and depth to his really fascinating characterization.
Yeah, I actually heard a bit of Kylo's, cluster in Poe's confrontation to Amilyn Holdo on the like it's very dark. Like he has this like just a few notes of the dun 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 dun, like just like a touch of it, and then she's gone and he's gone, and it's like, whoa, did you have some bad thoughts?
Well, I maybe I shouldn't be confessing this, but the first time I saw Last Jedi, I sort of fell for the trap that Rian Johnson set up, where I'm supposed to, reflexively be on Poe's side. So I'm assuming that Holdo is like secretly in league with the First Order, and she's trying to sabotage everything.
Yeah,
like, I didn't see through that. So I'm kind of thinking, this music, which maybe somehow is trying to mislead me into thinking that she's an antagonist. I fell for that, and very intentionally, Rian Johnson set up that expectation to thwart it.
And he even tricks us later on with the use of the Imperial Death Star theme with the, the fabric, like the iron coming down.
Yeah, the iron. Oh my God.
So he tricked us musically throughout the whole film. So, and I think that's very similar to the Rashomon effect that happens in the movie, that even the music is an unreliable narrator. Like, we can't necessarily even trust the music. So why should we trust what we're hearing with our own ears and our own eyes, that everything is the truth? We can't in The Last Jedi.
Yeah.
That to me is so fascinating.
Yeah. I mean, I was so excited when that moment of the Imperial, sort of Death Star theme popped up with the iron. I didn't initially notice it. It was actually someone else online who pointed it out to me, because in the actual mix, there's a lot of stuff, sound effects going on at that point. And part of me was just happy that we get a callback to a theme that hasn't been used in cinema since 1983 with Return of the Jedi. I guess Giacchino revived it for Rogue One, but in a Williams score. Like, it's just, these little Easter eggs are so cool, and it allows me to add another, entry into the Leitmotif catalog. But it's actually, it's very sophisticated what's going on there, and I think you get to the core to it. Like, the music is not always reliably narrating or explaining to us what the sort of true situation is. And though that's a gag, it's actually based on, a lot of sort of overlapping expectations. There's on one level,
Yeah. Visually what we're
to-
seeing, what we're
Mhm.
hearing.
And the
Yeah,
tone of the music is very, like, even if it weren't thematic, it's still very sort of ominous and aggressive, and the sorts of music that you associate with big bad space objects in this series. But there's this other layer. So if you're familiar with the series, like, and its musical identity, then you hear that Death Star motif and you think, oh, there's some new super weapon, or we're getting a new interesting perspective on, I guess, this is a supremacy ship at that point. And then to have the rug pulled out from underneath you, it's just fantastic, but very complicated.
Yeah. The storytelling in The Last Jedi is that. And I think that the music adds on to that complication.
The Last Jedi, I mean, the score is full of these sort of interesting ambiguities and moments that almost sound as though they're referring to things that we're familiar with, but in some subtly tweaked way, so that the connotation is flipped, or our relationship with the music is totally reversed from what it was when it first appeared. So I have two examples of this, if you're
Sure.
if you're willing to hear me out. Yeah. The first is, I think this is probably a lot to do with Rian Johnson's use of temp tracking of music that temporarily was on the soundtrack before Williams wrote new music.
Yeah.
It's known that he did quite a bit of that for this movie. And in the opening battle, towards the end, when, is it Paige Tico? Is that Rose's sister?
Yep.
When she's
bomber?
about to,
yeah,
in the bomber, and like there's this gigantic explosion, she does this heroic act of self-sacrifice. There is what I think is a pretty undeniable reference to the Battle of the Heroes theme from Revenge of the Sith, which is the theme for Obi-Wan and Anakin
and that fight, on Mustafar,
And it may be one of these instances of, like you said, like Princess Leia's theme playing when Obi-Wan Kenobi dies. It's just a sort of appropriate music. But I wonder, there may also be something at least somewhat mythically appropriate to that linkage of this act of heroic self-sacrifice on behalf of, a character who's not even, like, I don't think we hear her name in the movie itself, but it does make an impact, right? She has a pretty cool exit. So linking that and the sort of fiery imagery with another really pivotal moment in the sort of legend, the dramatic myth of Star Wars between Obi-Wan and Anakin. And I'm not even sure if Williams is going for anything specific. It may simply be that this has a suitably epic sound, and I haven't used this theme in a while, not since Revenge of the Sith, so why not have a little callback here? It may just be that, but any audience member can add their own interpretation, or to sort of read it however they please, and to draw their own personal connections. That's one of the reasons why this technique is so powerful, because it has a very personal aspect. Anyone who gets to know the music can sort of begin to come up with their own theories and their own interpretations.
Yeah.
So that's one cue there. And the other one, which is maybe my favorite moment from The Last Jedi, is the scene when Rey is lifting the rocks out of the crystal cave at the, like the sort of climax when she essentially saves everyone and discovers like just how powerful she is.
We get the awesome Luke over, like, him talking over it, kind of explaining to Kylo why, I will not be the last Jedi, and like she lifts the rocks.
Yeah,
it's really
and
good.
Immediately and I mean, this has nothing to do with the music, but I just love the use of extreme close-ups in Last Jedi too. Right, these really close views of Luke's eyes and Rey, and then it immediately goes to, I think, a pretty close-up shot to Rey, and she looks astounded by what she herself is doing.
Yeah,
and then suddenly the music becomes almost religious in its affect, right? You get a choir entering, and there isn't much of melody. It's sort of just presenting these very sacred sounding chords. And the use of choir at that moment is especially, I think, sort of relevant because there has been very little choir otherwise in the sequel trilogy.
Yeah, there hasn't been that much except for a little bit of choral with Snoke's theme, which is reminiscent of Palpatine and like the dark side, like sounds.
Very low, very hard to like pick out, but it's almost as like a sound effect.
We had way more choral in the prequels, but like to me, I think that was the thematic choice to tie the prequels almost to like Grecian tragedy in some ways, so it almost like functions like a chorus.
Yeah, it's definitely a sort of narrative agent in a way,
Yeah.
and you get um,
Like Padme's
it's
ruminations with the wailing woman in it. Yeah.
exactly that good old cliche. You know, it's very effective there. But with the Rey's theme, or not, it actually doesn't use Rey's theme. That's one of the fascinating things. Like this could be a big moment to
Yeah.
just have a full fleshed out version of her, very present and well fleshed out theme in that movie. But instead, it's a kind of non-thematic material. But it does evoke, in some quite specific ways, it evokes the music for the Order 66 sequence in Revenge of the Sith. You know, that big long
Right. Yeah.
lament.
There's a lot of choral in that too. And it's almost
Oh
like,
yeah.
like sad way, like sad,
Mm-hmm.
very religious sounding.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I don't think there's a text there. I'd have to listen a little bit more carefully, but I'm pretty sure they're just sort of oohing and eyeing for those two cues. And maybe it's relevant, maybe it's not, but it's in the same key at the conclusion, E minor, I think, and even has a very similar concluding cadence. So it makes me wonder, like, what is the purpose of linking these two scenes of Rey, sort of her apotheosis with her force powers and saving the day and being proving that the Jedi haven't ended. And then you go back to episode 3 and the music there.
And where the Jedi are ending. Well, that's very
Jedi are ending. Yeah.
It's very death and rebirth, and seeing that tie, that it is the waves of the Force in its cyclical nature. Yeah.
To use a frequently quoted phrase, it is like poetry, right? It rhymes.
Yeah, it does rhyme.
You know, and it's more than just the similar style of the music. I mean, this is clearly
tied.
Maybe not based on, but inspired or recalling something that happened earlier.
What if the temp track used for that scene, Ryan pulled that music from that specific point in that movie?
I think it's entirely possible. And if that's the case, then maybe Williams isn't thinking directly about linking it, but Rian Johnson is, and the music is doing that work.
Yeah, the conversation was happening at least through the information in the, like, for lack of a better term, like, it needs to feel like this. It's like, I don't know if you've read this, but like, we have Padme's coffin, right? And in episode 3, and then when Rey ships herself to Kylo, Ryan's like, no, it needs to look more like a coffin. I
never thought of that. Yeah.
Like, no, it needs to be more coffin-like. And she looks very similar in her look to that scene. So these parallels not only happen like visually, another weird visual similarity, and now that you're telling me all these musical ones, it's really interesting, but Kylo's boots are the exact same boots as Anakin's boots, except black.
Oh wow. Well, that would be the kind of thing that Kylo Ren would do. So.
I know. Like, not Darth Vader's boots, Anakin's boots.
Anakin's boots. Well, actually,
episode 3.
So that may be a little more complicated. Huh.
Yeah. So there's more and more like visual ties between the two, like, between Rey and Padme, and, we're getting musical ties, as you said. Is there any other kind of interesting musical ties that you've spotted?
I mean, they're almost every measure has something that responds to something that had come before. You just sort of get that for free based on the fact that it's now 8 scores written by the same person. And in some cases, Williams has, he writes similar themes for loosely similar characters. So young Anakin's theme in episode 1, it's not used very much beyond that, is very light, and the hints of darkness in it for sure. I mean, he kind of deconstructs the Imperial March towards the end, and reinserts it into Anakin's material. But for the most part, it's kind of youthful and optimistic and major, but a little bit more than just major. It's sort of hyper major. It has this sharpened fourth in it, which is very characteristic of youth. And that theme is linked to Yoda's theme that also it makes use of the sharpened fourth and has a lot of youthful character. I mean, it's sort of the opposite in terms of age range. It's very venerable. But, you could argue that Yoda has both a sort of a wizened aspect, but also a childlike, gleeful component.
I think that if Yoda had his way, he would play with kids all day. Like he would teach
Oh yeah,
younglings all day, you know? Like that's what
that would be
in his
very
way.
his happiest. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then Rose's theme, which is the new, the big new theme
Mm-hmm.
in episode 8, is also has the sharp and forth, the sort of Lydian scalar orientation, and she's also the sort of youthful character, a representative of like pure good in some ways, or at least the sort of
Right.
moral compass of the movie, particularly for Finn, a sort of agent for moral clarity and benevolence. So. In those cases, I sort of doubt that Williams is going and thinking, I'm going to intentionally craft a theme that avails itself of musical components of Yoda and Anakin and whatnot. And rather, I think he has in his mind a certain notion of what these sorts of characters or these sorts of emotions and attitudes, how they are captured musically. And he writes music that evokes them in his different kind of guises. So it's possible that a lot of these sorts of connections, these more associative ones, are not hyper consciously created, but are the result of Williams' consistent picturing of how these characteristics or personality traits are mapped onto music. And also, I mean, this is sort of a stylist, other composers also make use of these tropes. It's not just Williams, but he particularly has these sort of codes that he sticks with throughout the series.
Yeah. And so do you think that in 9, what do you think we're going to get? I mean, it's kind of hard to it's hard to guess because I don't know.
Yeah.
But based on what we're seeing, development of 9 full scores, what are we going to get out of 9?
Well, I mean, I could describe what I would like to get. I don't know if that's going to happen, but there's also.
I mean, this could be a speculation. Hey, everybody, we're entering musical speculation. What are we going to get from John Williams? Knowing that JJ is a more directive director to do with composers.
Yeah, that's true.
Right.
So, yeah, that's a good point. So there may be, in some ways, a little bit less flexibility for John Williams. I can't. I don't know exactly what the process will be like, but. My wish list.
JJ speaks the language a little bit more, so he can communicate like he is a composer himself, or he's done it in the past, and he can at least communicate the intention musically.
Very musical and very specific about what he likes musically and what I think he wants the music to achieve. So I don't think it's an accident that episode 7 had all these sort of loose ends and speculation enticing musical details, because that's very much J.J. Abrams' sort of modus, the mystery box.
The mystery box, yeah. Can you give an example of a musical loose end?
Well, like Rey's theme, for example. I mean, there's so much embedded within it. And on one hand, you can sort of just take it as, I know you guys did a great podcast on this, so I can't, I'm not going to be able to go into as much detail as you did, but
I mean, there's feel free. I mean, put me straight.
Believe me, I could go on. I just don't want to. I want to keep you on all day. But yeah, Rey's theme is extraordinarily dense, right, with meaning and potential meaning, and there are all sorts of. I mean, you can see this. You just go on YouTube and look, use the keywords Rey's theme plus secrets, and there'll be like 40 different videos, each one sort of claiming to have unearthed the secret of Rey's parentage or whatever by analyzing her theme. I think there's a very clear, very intentional affiliation with the Force theme. There's no question there. I mean, the harmony is identical in some ways, and they're literally layered on top of each other in counterpoint in the end credits. So that's no accident.
Very intentional, yes.
But I've seen people play them backwards or remove notes here and there and rearrange stuff to find the Imperial March or
I heard
the Emperor's
connection
theme.
to Emperor's theme. Yeah, I heard that one and I was like, no.
Yeah, I mean, you can do that with pretty much any music if you want to. You can deconstruct it and find what you're looking for, and I think there's a lot of that kind of confirmation bias going on. But but the fact remains that this theme is structured in this rich but somewhat ambiguous way. It's not a overwhelmingly straightforward heroes rah theme like Luke Skywalker gets, or a unambiguously romantic theme, like Princess Leia gets.
I feel like it's a very internal theme.
Yeah, it's a sort of more psychological.
Yeah. Like, and that's what we pulled out with like the heroine's journey is like most women or heroine journey followers, when you come from that structure, have internal journeys rather than external journeys. And sometimes they fight external things, but the change and the realizations all happen internally.
Yeah. And so, yeah, exactly. And her theme, I think, is uniquely well suited and maybe prone to those sorts of internal transformations, because it's very flexible. It also has this kind of through line. The harmony is the same, but the melody itself can shift. And I don't think that we've heard the full form that it's taken yet.
So do you think that we'll get a different version than the concert piece that was on the soundtrack?
I don't know. I'd love to. I know that Williams is or maybe has already written some new arrangements of some of these themes. Like, I think he wrote a violin and orchestra version of Ray's theme for Anne-Sophie Mutter, which I don't quote me on that, or maybe do quote me on that, but don't hold me to it. It hasn't come out yet, but I'm pretty sure that's going to happen. And that may, do some pretty radical stuff with the theme if it's given to a solo instrument. Generally speaking, solo instruments are even more internal and more representative of a kind of single personal voice. So there may be aspects of the theme and her character that come out through that concert version. But in the score for episode 9, I expect it to get considerable development and evolution. If nothing else, because Williams is clearly infatuated with Daisy Ridley and loves writing music for her.
He also loves Ray. Like, he loves the character too, and he wants to do that justice.
Who couldn't? Actually, don't answer that question. Every YouTube comment section will show you who couldn't, but I am a fan.
What's another example? Obviously Kylo's theme, which leaves off, like he's ruminating. That's what he's experiencing.
Yeah, he has come nowhere close to thematic self-realization or self-actualization. Like, every time this theme occurs, it's stunted in some way, or it doesn't cadence, or it doesn't even when it seems as though it's going to get something more extended. And the very end of Last Jedi, when he and the stormtroopers are marching into the... Yeah,
we get this full martial play of his... like his core, like, I'm a bad person theme.
Exactly. Yeah, like the theme that he presents to the world.
Yeah, like his bravado. Is it called bravado? Do you call it bravado? Do you call it...
I think aggressive, maybe?
Aggressive, yeah.
Yeah, it's a little more neutral. I like bravado because it's very much about his sort of his projection of himself as the heir to Darth Vader. Yeah. But it never is expanded really. Even in that case, it kind of just trails off and it doesn't reach. Yeah, because he's been beaten. In some ways, they won the battle, right? They blew up the vast majority of the Resistance fleet and ships, but there's been a clear, moral victory on behalf of Rey and Luke and Poe and Leia, and also he's been totally humiliated, and like in the worst possible way. He's presented with all of his character flaws and all of his misconceptions, and in the process, sort of, he costs the First Order the ability to really have an unqualified victory because they escape or whatever. So it doesn't make sense for him to get a full statement of his theme because he's not actualized in any way. He's totally like a stunted character. I guess it could go a couple different paths.
Do you think that, I personally see that this is a redemption arc? Like, that's just me. Like, because I
was just supposed to ask. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I personally see it as a redemption arc because I've lots of reasons. I basically started this podcast to talk about those reasons. Yeah. In his theme itself, do we ever get any indications other than his hesitation and his confusion that he is leaning light side? I think we do during the throne room scene when he's certainly at least genuinely concerned about Rey. Like, you can hear it in the theme. Yeah. Like in the music, because whenever he looks at her, it's like, duh, are you okay? Okay, back to fighting. Like, I mean, where else do we do this?
Well, I think there's definitely a potential there. I never would underestimate John Williams' ability to transform a theme from suggesting one thing, like in the case of Kylo Ren, this sort of self-image of bravado and being in control, and it could be transformed, by all sorts of musical techniques into something.
I just think that we'll get the battle main theme for him at some point. Like, if he is gonna go and save the day, he'll become the Skywalker hero.
Yeah, and I mean, it's not strictly speaking his theme, but boy, does he get the Force theme when he and Rey are fighting together. Yeah, and that Force theme, amazingly, I mean, it's a very similar statement to two things. The unused statement in Force Awakens when Rey actually captures a lightsaber and flies.
That was
out
the
of the
Binary
snow.
Sunsets theme,
Yeah,
though. That was
exactly.
The full, like they music edited that.
But that was lifted from A New Hope, right? So, but there was an original version of, or maybe it's somewhere in Force Awakens. Actually, now that I think about it, there's also a version when right after Kylo Ren has killed his dad and Chewie's shooting him, and like the sun's going out or whatever, and there's a big statement of the Force theme there. So that is like very similar to the version that plays when Rey and Kylo Ren sort of join forces, but also the version when Yoda calls down lightning on the big Force tree or whatever on Octo.
Oh.
That is virtually identical. So maybe Williams is just sort of taking a lot of shortcuts, but you can't help but hear these sorts of connections if you listen carefully enough.
I wouldn't have been able to tell that they were very similar.
Yeah, so I don't think the Force theme belongs to any one character. A dark side character can get it. I mean, Anakin gets it in Revenge of the Sith. Like, there's some very darkened versions there.
But we've never heard the Force theme applied to like people who we consider to be genuinely beyond redemption, like Snoke and Palpatine.
I suppose not. Yeah, or the Emperor.
Yeah,
it's really it's open-ended in terms of it doesn't judge. Doesn't judge characters. So
I guess I'm sorry I interrupted you with my whole like I need redemption, but no. What do you think is going to happen?
Well, musically speaking, or just in terms of narrative, I don't know.
Whatever.
Well, I think there'll probably be some play of Rey's themes and Kylo Ren's themes. I'm hoping that they maintain this sort of mental connection they have, so that they can interact without being in the same space. I mean, such a brilliant formal device in Last Jedi, and they'd be fools not to continue with, because what a great dynamic pairing. And I think their themes will interact and maybe layer on top of each other. Certainly, I mean, we've seen that happen already with like the Force theme and Kylo Ren's theme, that it can sit on top of other themes and sort of snake its way in there. I think there'll be, I hope that there'll be lots of integration of previously established musical ideas, including not just from the original trilogy, but the prequel trilogy. I kind of suspect that's where they're going to go with this, to tie up the entire triple trilogy. So maybe a little Duel of the Fates is a possibility.
Oh, that would be fun.
It's definitely like the most iconic musical piece from the prequel. So I think if they're going to bring back anything that isn't trivial, that it would be the Duel of the Fates ostinato or theme.
Kind of like if there's a climax of the whole saga in some sort of battle, right?
Yeah, it just sort of makes natural sense. And it would be a nice way to revive some of the really memorable material from episode 1 and 2 and 3. It makes little appearances there. I would not be surprised if Across the Stars finds its way in there somehow. I mean, it would kind of depend on whether they're going to really like bring back the history of Anakin and Padme in some way. Yeah. I think that's going to happen. I would be surprised if that's left
dealt with in some ways.
Undealt with, yeah.
Yeah, untapped, yeah. I mean, Christy pointed out and that there's Across the Stars in the underlay of the hand touch scene in The Last Jedi, layered with the Force theme.
And it's a theme that Williams it's been on his mind like very recently. He did another one of these violin and orchestra rearrangements, and a very transformative rearrangement just last year. So he's still working through Across the Stars in a way. Yeah. So I'd be surprised if, given the opportunity, he wouldn't find a way to.
I mean, it is such a swelling love theme. But we haven't heard it is tragic. So
Yeah.
it's fascinating. It's I find the term across the stars so interesting because in larger canon, they've actually touched on what the concept of a Skywalker is. And a Skywalker is somebody who can use the Force to navigate hyperspace.
Whoa. Is that something that we're going to see Kylo Ren do?
I mean, I think this is just me being weird and speculative. I mean, what the Force, that's the name of the podcast. But I think we're going to get a bigger version of what happened with the hand touch theme in that we might actually get something called skywalking where they'll actually transcend space and time and go somewhere else together.
I believe I'm sure there's going to be some sort of game changer, whether it's
I want it to be freaky and weird and awesome.
Yeah. I think we're going to get new Force powers. I think there's going to be some sort of universe shakeup, right, to open up the space for new installments. My personal theory is that somehow everyone is going to get the Force, or it's going to become not just restricted to the special few, but and that's kind of thematically, at least, that's suggested at the end of The Last Jedi with the stable boy. But I think it's also just in keeping with the more inclusive nature of the sequel trilogy, and I don't know, just be a nice message, and it'd open up all kinds of crazy possibilities if it just became something that everyone could do. So that's maybe it's a little silly, but that's my
I think that in general everyone can do it. I think it's just that for some reason, the Force is concentrated in a few almost avatars of the Force that have these universe-changing ideas. But I very much believe thematically that we've seen that in other areas of canon, that's what they're hinting at, that either nobody will have it or everybody will have it, and it's kind of up to it something along those lines, there's going to be some sort of equalization happening, and that's been presented as a concept in the Legends of Luke Skywalker. I just like the idea that we're going to get ties back to the original trilogy and prequels, just with the music itself, because it is not just the end of 3 movies, it's the end of 9 in some ways.
Yeah. And especially, all signs are pointing towards this being Williams' last full score for the
I hope he continues
Star Wars franchise.
Kind of do what he's done with Solo.
Solo or Galaxy's Edge theme park. I don't think he's not the kind who ever is completely going to stop, right? He's still revising pieces and he's still revisiting them. I think he's very aware of his legacy and wants to make this Star Wars musical tapestry as rich and as long lasting as possible. And one way to do that is to integrate everything. So I think he'll do, if given the opportunity and given the sort of dramatic motivation, I think he probably will stitch things together in what I'm sure will be a really satisfying way.
At the end of Revenge of the Sith, he thought that was going to be the end of it, and he ended up giving us almost an epic concert piece in the credits, covering all of the layers of everything.
Oh yeah, it's not just the end credits too. It's the sort of last few scenes. There's virtually no dialogue after the twins are sent off. So it's just a musical postlude. Right, it's setting the stage, but it's also summary, and that's very Wagnerian in a way. Having the music have the last word, the music deliver this kind of summarizing coda to the series. And yes, at that point, he thought he was done with everything, so he's going to give this nice wrap everything up in a nice bow. And then, amazingly, 3 more movies is suddenly on his plan. And well, he didn't know that, episode or the original Star Wars was going to go anywhere. So the ending of that movie is also very satisfying in a summarized way.
I think we're going to get something like that in 9. I think he's going to want to surprise us and blow us out of the water with, hey, look, remember all the stuff I did?
Yeah. I think there'll be musical surprises. I think there are going to be narrative surprises, things that we didn't think or realize were possible to be included within Star Wars storytelling. At least that's what I hope for, right? Something that really changes the game. And I think there are some aspects which are probably predictable. We'll probably get some music for the Knights of Ren in some way, right? Yeah. Maybe a new theme. If there's any new theme, it doesn't seem like there's any major new characters. Although who Carrie Russell's going to play, I guess, is a mystery, but we can speculate about that at least. But there may be, some musical set pieces or cues that are so tied to like a spoilerific game changer that we can't predict them. So I am anticipating something like that.
So if it is a love story between Kylo and Rey, are we going to get a love theme?
If there were a love theme, I mean, they have such well-established musical themes already that if there's a love theme, it would have to somehow intertwine them. Combine them or have one change into the other, or infuse one with the other, have raise harmonies under like Kylo Ren's melodic material or vice versa. I don't know. You'd have to ask the composer how that would actually get accomplished, but it's certainly, it could happen. And
musically.
Williams could do that. Like, I don't think that would be a big ask for him.
You're like, here you go.
Yeah. I mean, he may get a little jealous, right? Because so far it's been, Rey is, strictly his own. So having to bring, a competing, suitor in the person of Kylo Ren might be a little weird. I don't know.
So did you want to maybe listen to an example of, leitmotif in action?
I'd love to.
C-3PO's story.
That is one of my favorite scenes. It's such a throwaway in some ways. The scene for reference, this is in Return of the Jedi, right? And they're in Endor in the Ewok village, and they've just sort of convinced the Ewoks not to eat them. The majority of the rebels. So, and as a celebration, C-3PO is narrating to the Ewoks the story of Star Wars thus far in a very partial and humorous way.
I don't know if you know this, but I love droids so much. And this scene itself is, to me, like almost a culmination of C-3PO changing over time. Because in the first movie, so in A New Hope in Star Wars, he's like, I'm not much more than an interpreter. I'm not very good at storytelling. And in Return of the Jedi, we get this beautiful moment where he's actually convincing these furry fuzzballs to help them by telling the Star Wars. You know, like, it's beautiful.
Right. It's beautiful. And in some ways, I think the scene is meant to read as slightly comedic, because you have the very, silly sight of Han Solo being like the Ewoks are hugging his leg, and it's all a little awkward, but it also is extremely touching and in its own way kind of eloquent. Right? I think that C-3PO, he's uniquely well suited to giving this story, and it's something it's very
R2-D2, who knows the whole story, but he himself, C-3PO is the only one who can actually tell it, which is cool. What did he do with this track specifically? Did he he built the layers of the storytelling, much like almost the sound design with C-3PO talking about the story, and we get like little snippets of what has happened throughout the original trilogy as C-3PO is telling the story itself.
Yeah, it was really clever. It's another musical summary in a way. Williams sort of
Mm-hmm.
cycles through a lot of the leitmotifs that have been established. Not all of them. I mean, it has to be compressed because C-3PO is squeezing a whole lot into a very little time frame. But Williams does check off the main theme and the Force theme. The Imperial March is there, Han Solo and the Princess, and a kind of attempt to create the Rebel fanfare. It doesn't quite sound like the Rebel fanfare, but it is in the same ballpark.
Yeah.
So and these attach kind of to the moments in the narrative where they'd be most appropriate. So we're going through the Battle of Hoth, and there's sort of AT-AT music, and the Rebel fanfare is included in there somehow. When Nooch Vader is invoked, then you
yeah, Nooch Vader, yeah, and we also get like the breathing in the sound design too.
Exactly. So it's all very ingenious, but the transformation that's occurring here is kind of an instrumentation and texture. So instead of this full symphony orchestra, which has been the default for pretty much the entirety of the past 2.5 movies, we get much reduced orchestration and some kind of more tribal sounding drums and percussion instruments, not standard orchestra instruments, but things that are kind of more associated with the Ewoks and their culture, to the point where it's a little fuzzy whether this should even be considered underscore in the same way that the Imperial March or the big battle music should, because it kind of exists in a similar plane as the music that the Ewoks are physically producing in other scenes. Or alternatively, it's possible that this is sort of music that's being generated or ushered into existence by C-3PO through his active storytelling, because it's so precise, it's so on the nose. When Luke Skywalker, his name is dropped, then his theme plays in a very sort of literal-minded way. So there's incredibly close alignment of storytelling and leitmotif to a more exaggerated extent than is already present, right? We really are dealing with literal labels for things, and played in this kind of hybrid, childish / tribal / kind of Ewok source instrumentation.
Yeah.
And
it's almost in universe music is being played in this
exactly
way. Yeah.
It's not quite there, right? It's not as overt as, say, the Imperial March being played in a major key over the loudspeakers in Solo, which I, for one, I did not mind that. I know some people have strong
opinions. But Kevin Kiner did that theme first in Rebels as a parade theme for Empire Day.
Right.
It's joyous and parade like.
I could see how that could rub some people the wrong way, but I think it's a natural and clever thing to do. But this Ewok scene, the C-3PO's bedtime story, is not quite as overt, because there's still plausible deniability that the music is actually just coming from the London Symphony Orchestra, not an Ewok offstage Ewok.
It's not like Yub Nub or at the end of
where we can see the the Ewok drummers playing as stormtrooper helmets. Yeah. Are you a Yub Nub partisan, or do you like the victory celebration from the special edition?
Because Star Wars is by definition transformational, and so both exist in my mind, and both are true.
Yeah, both are true. No contradiction there. I kind of this will get me banned from some fan communities probably, but I kind of prefer the victory celebration version. I think it's just a little bit more, I don't know, significant sounding.
Yeah.
Yub Nub is great, but it's almost too cheerful and joyous, and there's a kind of bittersweet or melancholy component to the victory celebration, which is a little bit more.
What have we all been through, kind of?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it also, like, musically, it's a little bit closer. It's tied a little bit more closely to some of particularly the prequels. There's some echoes of that music in Phantom Menace. So, I'm not a hater of the original Ewok celebration. It's what I grew up with, Oh,
okay, but what are your feelings on Jedi Rocks?
Oh, well, that's a different story. That burn that with fire, please. Yeah.
It was fine.
It was fine. But the original, I mean, who could beat Lapti Nek, which was the original song, and which literally translates in Huttese to fancy man, I think. And it's such this weird, like, it's a direct flip. I'm forgetting the name, but it's like very clearly based on a pre-existing sort of disco tune. And you don't quite get that with Jedi Rocks, which...
I love the source music in Star Wars. Like,
Oh, yeah.
and I like how it's expanded, like with Lin-Manuel Miranda
Oh,
doing
yeah.
Jabba Flow. Like, to me, I love that is even that is like in universe storytelling, because it's like, it's about like somebody having an affair on Jabba. Like that's just amazing.
Things if you actually pay attention to the lyrics and can translate them.
Yes.
Actually, to give a shout out to one of my students, I have a grad student, hi Drew Gresco, who's doing his thesis on the Cantina Band and the work that it accomplishes in establishing character and establishing the universe. So it's not just about the symphonic underscore, the source music, the music that occurs within these worlds is also highly significant to the narrative.
Storytelling. Yeah.
And the storytelling. Exactly. Yeah.
Like Chicken in the Pot does such a great job of establishing that, like, party and like the singer and like the sensual nature of the song itself is really amazing. I don't know. I just... Frank, I want to talk to you forever because this is just so much fun, and I know it's just kind of like a chat between friends, kind of in a way.
Well, there's literally no activity that I enjoy more or that I could do for longer than this.
We both need to probably do other things occasionally. So, but I
know.
But
make room for other life stuff so that we can get back to talking about Star Wars.
I know, right? Yeah, so we can actually afford to talk about Star Wars. But is there anything that's like on your mind that you would want people to know about Leitmotifs and appreciating, especially the John Williams built Star Wars musical, I guess, language in some ways?
I know this may sound a little corny, but it is such a wonderful way into a love and appreciation of music, generally speaking. I mean, how many people do you think that Star Wars has served as their entry point into orchestral music or film music in general, or music driven by themes, or music that develops over the course of many installments? I know for a fact that there are many people for whom this is, an essential part of their musical identity, whether they're musicians or scholars of music or just fans, or not even at that level, just people who, can't get a tune out of their head. And I suppose if I'm any indication, there's no end to how deep you can go into this sort of material. John Williams has produced something that is frankly unprecedented in its bottomless quality material, but you can sort of appreciate it just as a film goer. You can study it and get into the themes and have be able to follow it sort of as a musical experience. And if you really sort of unbalanced like me, then you can spend your whole life just sort of digging into it, and you'll find surprises every single time you watch, and every single time you listen to it.
Well, thank you, Frank, for sharing your love of this with us.
Well, it is my pleasure.
And I don't feel like I went through everything that I wanted to, so we'll have
to do this again.
I will definitely love to have you back for 9 so that we can deep dive into the soundtrack and like just understand everything about what it's being done. And I'm sure things that were presented to us in 7 will make a lot more sense after we hear the thematic ends to things.
I would not be surprised.
Yeah. So thank you for coming on the show. Where can people find you and your fabulous catalog?
They can find me on Twitter. I'm FMLEHMAN on Twitter. And if they're looking for the more scholarly route, they can look up me on academia.edu, just Frank Lehman, and you can download my articles, my catalog, see me ranting about the latest Star Wars musical developments on social media. Yeah, I'm all over the place. It's been a real pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
Well, thank you for coming on the show, and cheers. Thank you, everyone, for listening to What the Force. I'm Marie-Claire Gould, your host. Our music is orchestral music composed by Christy Carew. We have a Patreon at patreon.com/whattheforce. We would like to thank all our patrons, especially those who love What the Force, In Wild Space, Night Huntress, and Susan. We are available wherever podcasts are found and YouTube. You can connect with us at Twitter at WT Force Show or on Facebook at What the Force. Feel free to reach out to us and start a conversation. Cheers.